This is Raythe from Raythe Reign. I'm an author of serialized gay romance fiction. Every week on this podcast, I'll be reading a chapter from one of my gay fantasy shifter serials called Dragon's Reign. I'll explain at the break how you can find out more about this story and others I write. So let's get to it. Chapter 119, Flawless Victory. Valerius dove deep. He wasn't sure if the water would quench the plasma or if it would simply fall into the water untouched. Then again, even if the water did quench it, how hot would the water get? So he dove deep, deeper, deeper. His lungs burned and there was pressure in his head. Only when those two things became almost unbearable did he stop his downward strokes and twist his body around to look up towards the surface. The plasma ball had destroyed a large section of the narrow path that ran along the lake. If he had not jumped, he would have been disintegrated with the stone. A wash of hot water rushed down upon him as the plasma ball was quenched. The icy pool became as hot as bath water. He stroked up from the surface, but at an angle away from the path and out deeper into the pool. The stone was still glowing hot where the plasma ball had bitten into it. He did not wish to risk getting burned, but there were other dangers too in going farther out into the middle of the pool, namely, dragons. Just as he was about to reach the surface and take a grateful gulp of air, a wave of pressure lifted him up until his face kissed the water's surface. He took a huge draught of oxygen just before a wave washed over his face and pushed him under again. He opened his eyes. He was just a few feet from the water's surface, and the pool's depths were dark. The few construction lights that ringed the pool cast off an ugly yellow light that did not pierce the darkness very far. So Valerius could only see the two dragons fighting, rolling over one another again and again in pieces as they drew nearer to him. Mephis's membranous wing with a sharp point on the end, Voz's tail with 3 spikes, one larger than the next, with the largest at the very end looking more like a stalagmite than a spike. Mephis's mighty green back, studded with bony plates, flashes of Voz's glowing purple eyes. Lungs burning again, Valerius forced himself to look away from this fight of the titans and rise to the surface. He gulped in huge mouthfuls of air, even as the waves the two battling dragons made lifted him and sent him spiraling down. Their fighting had the effect of a tide on the water. As Valerius stroked fiercely towards the shore, he would be pulled back several feet as the dragons' bodies affected the water. The doorway that Valerius aimed to get to was directly in the path of the raging dragons. But the safest route, one that would get him onto the path again, was not terribly safe either. The pool's surface that had been almost still like ice was now choppy with waves. They slapped over the sides of the path and were starting to eat away at the slender length of ground. By the time he made it to a section of path, that part might be gone. Besides, the behemoth now knows Illarion is here. It likely realizes that I am not far behind. Valerius thought that the behemoth would not dare kill Caden until it had absorbed Iolaire fully, for fear that it would harm the white dragon spirit. Not that it cared about hurting Iolaire, but that would weaken its power. So Valerius hoped with everything he had that Caden's physical form was all right for a little while longer. Valerius ducked his head under the water and opened his eyes. He wanted to see exactly where the two dragons were in relation to him. They appeared to be 50 feet down below him. A wing, a tail, an arm might rise up higher than that, but still there would be a good 10 feet between him and them, even if that did happen. He decided to risk it and simply swim the rest of the way across to the tunnel mouth. Determined to get across, he pumped his arms and legs against the swells and headed towards the tunnel that would hopefully lead him to Caden. Maybe, just maybe, by the time he found the young man's body, Raziel and the young man would have saved Iolaire from the behemoth, and Caden would awaken in his arms. Will I know when Raziel and Caden free Iolaire? Will there be some sense of that triumph before Raziel returns to the lair? He tried not to let the scream that once again lodged in his throat escape him, with the thought that both Raziel and Caden were going up against the behemoth without him, without the other dragon spirits and their shifters. That hole in his heart was where Raziel and Caden should be. He tried to tell himself everything would be all right as he cut through the water. Even as the waves crashed over his head, he could see Landry and her two brothers seated now in some of the huge boulders, swinging their legs and simply looking around, waiting for Raziel and Caden's return to the lair. Jasper Hawes paced in front of the mirror like a trapped animal. He kept looking up into it. He would have seen Valerius struggling in the water. His human body was so much weaker without Raziel. His arms strained, his leg muscles were knotting, his back and shoulder muscles bunched. He would never complain about any physical activity again. He would enjoy every second of his shifter's strength when he regained it. Suddenly, there was a swell beneath him. He looked down and saw a ruby back rising up in the water beneath him. Mephis and Vosith had rolled over with Vosith now on top for the first time. And she had seen him. Glowing purple eyes glared up at him from the darkness as she twisted her long, sinuous neck around. She removed one of her forelimbs from Mephis's chest and snatched up at him. The clawed hand came at him with the speed of a freight train. Valerius felt his heart drop into his feet. He drew himself into a ball and rolled in the water away from her grasp. Pain bloomed along his back and left hip. It felt like a dagger had been dragged over his flesh. The water was too dark to see it turn red from his blood, but he felt the heat of it leaving him. He had completely misjudged how deep they were, or perhaps how deep they would stay. The tip of her claw had sliced him open as easily as a knife through paper. He gasped at the pain of it and sucked in water. He gagged and his body jerked, his limbs flailing uncontrollably as he started to drown. The clawed limbs slashed towards him. Valerius would not be too ashamed to admit that he wailed internally as he saw it coming. He was naked. He had no armor. He had no hide. He had no weapons. It was going to cut him in half. But then a green wing swept through the water and appeared between him and that red-clawed limb. The membrane was cut, and he heard a watery roar from Mephis. It echoed in his ears. Valerius frantically ripped his hands through the water to reach the surface. His head broke through, and he vomited water out of his mouth and lungs. His body hitched. He had to swim away from their titanic bodies, but he was unable to move. He was practically unable to stop from sinking. Cannot feel Caden. Definitely cannot do it in front of Valerian. He looked down and saw a huge green back with two wings outstretched. They touched the two sides of the pool. The spikes scraped along the stone walls before Mephis had a chance to draw them in tight against his massive body. They spun around and Vosith was on top, and she was reaching for Valerius once more. He drew in a lungful of air and shot towards the shore. "Illarion, keep her down!" Valerius prayed. There was another swell of water, but this time he could take advantage of it. It lifted him, and he rode it towards the tunnel. A red tail cut through the water behind him. Those 3 spikes! He could easily imagine them sinking into his back, pinning him to her red tail. He imagined looking down and seeing those bony spikes poking through his chest as his life's blood ran out. And he imagined her drawing that tail down into the deep, him still attached to it, as he watched his blood stream by his face as he bled out and drowned at the same time. At the last moment, he dove and rolled to the side. The tail, though, stopped. He looked down and saw that Mephis had bitten the base of it. Dragon's blood streamed out, and there was a shattering wave of pain from Vosith. "Mephis is not to be toyed with." Valerius let out an hysterical internal laugh. His head broke through the water again. He was just 15 feet from shore. Pain streaked through his body with every movement. Blood trailed out of his wounds that did not heal. He wondered how deep they were, and if he really was in danger of bleeding out already. He had no real memories to gauge how badly he was injured, because everything hurt, even the most normal things now. "I need to keep going to get to Caden. Once Raziel returns to me, I will heal like this never happened," he told himself. 15 feet turned to 10, to 5. He grasped the edge of the path and tried to pull himself up. For a moment, he couldn't do it. He gasped and shook. The pain from his wounds felt like acid being poured over his skin. He felt the hot wash of blood still flowing down his back. I believe this is bad, Valerius thought grimly. But he thought of Caden, too. He pictured that crooked smile and those bright eyes. He imagined Caden's laugh. Caden laughed at most things, seeing the world with delight instead of filled with darkness. Is he dying? Good fucking God, he's dying! Jasper Hawes hissed. Valerius's eyes widened. He could hear the leader of Humans First in his head like he heard Raziel and Caden. Now that was not pleasant. So fucking worthless without your shifter powers, aren't you, Valerius? Jasper howled at him. If he dies, does that damn dragon die too? Jasper, shut it! Landry snapped. Landry and her brothers got off the rocks that they had been sitting on and were massing near the mirror with Jasper. The Humans First leader was stabbing a finger at what must have been his image in the mirror. King Valerius, Landry cried, you've got to get out of the water. Come on, you can do it. He's the one I pledged loyalty to? Fuck that. He's nothing. He's no one without being a shifter, and that wasn't based on merit, Jasper snarled. Valerius frowned at his words. Since when had Jasper pledged loyalty to him? Then he realized that Caden had to be behind that. He imagined the White Dragon King got great pleasure in making dragons say such a pledge. He was a great warrior. That's how he got his spirit, Landry argued. Everyone knows that. That was the official story. They didn't know about his dead brother and his simple desire to destroy everyone and everything. That was how he had lured Raziel to him. Where was the rage that had motivated him back then? The devil-may-care attitude. He had expected to die in the battlefield, but he hadn't had Caden then. A young man he loved with everything he was. And he knew now that Raziel could not survive without him either. People were depending on him, and he wasn't going to let them down. Did you know that you can get some of my gay romance books for free? Every month, I have at least one book free to download, right from Amazon, so you can easily read it on any device. But these books can only be free for 5 days at a time. If you don't want to miss out, just sign up for my mailing list, and I'll send you an email whenever there's a free book available. The link to the sign-up form is in the description down below. Look at him now, Jasper hooted. He's so used to having preternatural powers that he's gotten soft. He can't handle being human. Jasper was right. He had gotten soft. He had gotten weak. He had relied too long on Raziel. He had forgotten that it was the dragon and not the man that made the difference. He had been with Raziel so long. He had thought the dragon's strength his own and not something borrowed or gifted at great cost. Valerius thought of Raziel always in that lair. He heaved himself out of the water and rolled onto his back. He breathed there deeply. His limbs shook and his wounds ached, but he used that as fuel. Pain as energy, pain as power. He's not been human in a long time, you idiot. He's just getting used to it again, Landry defended him. You can do this, King Valerius. You can get to Caden. He was so stupid that he didn't even know about the behemoth. That we had a wall in his goddamn city, Jasper pointed out. The behemoth is going to destroy him. He's weak. You're wrong. King Valerius, keep going, Landry cried. Thank you, Landry, and you too, Jasper, Valerius said as he got to his feet. You both said exactly what I needed to hear. He heard them both gasp. They hadn't realized he had been listening to all they had been saying. He was darkly amused to see Jasper pale. Jasper was only a big man when he thought that there would be no consequences for him. Not that Valerius could reach him quite yet and administer those consequences. Honestly, though, even if he had Jasper in front of him, he could have done little. He was trembling, but his legs were firm beneath him. He turned towards the tunnel that was just 5 feet away. There was a sudden roar. It wasn't blurred or distorted by water. It was Vozith. Her head was above the surface. He looked for Mephis. The green dragon was wedged beneath the surface by one ruined wing that was stuck against the wall. Green eyes looked up at Valerius for one moment. and Valerius knew what Illarion was thinking, which was that he had failed to protect Valerius. There was such despair in his gaze that Valerius wished, for just Illarion's sake, that things would have turned out differently. "See, he's going to die, Landry." Jasper sounded both happy and terrified. "No, no!" Landry screamed. Valerius lifted his head. He saw plasma again bubble in the back of Vos's throat. He dove towards the tunnel, but he knew he was going to be too late. He rolled into the tunnel. His shoulders and back struck the stone floor hard, but he kept rolling, thinking somehow he could roll far enough away from the searing, sticky plasma that would roast his flesh from his bones and then destroy those as well. "Caden, forgive me," Valerius thought. "I love you." He wanted those words to be imprinted in the lair. He saw Landry with eyes wide and her hands covering her mouth. One brother looked to be ripping his hair out in alarm. The other curled in on himself. Jasper looked like a man that was seeing what he'd always wished for, and yet dreaded all the same. Valerius felt a whoosh of hot air that preceded the plasma ball. He kept moving, crawling now on his belly, trying to get to his feet to run. He would keep trying to get away until he was ash. But suddenly, the tunnel went dark. The lights from the pool area were cut off, and there was no blast of purple light coming down the tunnel towards him. He dared glance over his shoulder. What he saw had him skidding to a halt. The darkness was from Mephis's body covering the tunnel's mouth so that no plasma had gotten to him. But that was not the surprise, not what had him staring. Mephis had Vos's head in its hands, except it wasn't attached to her neck. Mephis had ripped her head off. A rain of red sparks started to come off of the ruby dragon's head as it started to break apart. The sparks gathered together and slowly streamed out of the other tunnel mouth, heading upward to the sky. "Mephis killed that dragon," Landry murmured. "I didn't think you could do that." While Valerius had seen Raziel do something similar to the behemoth, none of them had ever obviously killed another dragon in this world. Valerius had almost not thought it possible. Mephis and Valerius watched until the head had disappeared. Then Mephis turned and looked at Valerius. Valerius had made his way down the tunnel. He stepped out onto the path. He extended a hand towards Mephis. The green dragon swam over to him. Its right wing was shredded, but already was starting to heal. Mephis's massive head was even with his body. For the first time ever, Valerius reached over and touched Mephis. Its scales were warm and slick. He slowly ran his hands over them, not quite stroking Mephis, but connecting with it. The green dragon's eyes half closed, and it made a low sound that was almost a purr. Valerius was shocked that his eyes stung with tears. "You are magnificent, Mephis," Valerius murmured. "Thank you for saving me," repeatedly. The green dragon preened, but then those green eyes searched him. It drew in a deep breath. Valerius felt something running down the back of his leg. It wasn't water. He was still bleeding. Mephis's eyes widened. Then in a moment, the green dragon was gone and a naked Illarion was treading water below him. "I didn't save you to have you bleed to death," Illarion grumbled as he effortlessly pulled himself up onto the path. Valerius had a momentary stab of jealousy at that easy movement. "I will have that back again," he promised himself. "Do you know that your dragon breath stinks?" Valerius asked. Illarion let out a laugh. "Ah, I do not believe your insults now, Valerius. You looked at me with love." "What?" Valerius glared at him. "Brotherly love." Illarion smirked as he dropped down on his haunches and inspected Valerius's wounds. "And you called me magnificent." I called Mephis magnificent." "Same thing." Illarion grinned. "You are good too, but believe me that we are not our dragons." "Not completely," Valerius said, as he thought of his weakness now. Illarion let out a hiss, ignoring Valerius's words, secure in the fact that he and Mephis were one. "This isn't healing. You're not going to drop dead from it, but it looks infected or something." Voseth must have had some poison on her claws. My leg feels numb, Valerius confessed. Can you still walk? Illarion stood up. I can carry you. Fireman's carry or bride over the threshold? Valerius asked dryly. Illarion stared at him before letting out a snort. Bride, for sure. But in all seriousness, we should get a move on, if you can. I can. I will crawl, Valerius said. Then let us go. Illarius turned to head into the tunnel. Valerius grasped his arm. Illarion looked back at him with a lifted eyebrow. Illarion. Thank you, Valerius said. I would be dead without you many times over. I am grateful you're here with me. Illarion's expression went blank for a second, which told Valerius he had struck something deep inside of the green dragon shifter. A faint smile appeared on Illarion's lips. When I tell this tale, and I will, repeatedly, you will repeat these sweet nothings for all to hear, Illarion grinned. Of course, Valerius deadpanned, and I shall tell them of your bad breath as well, which I am convinced knocked Voseth out before you ripped off her head. Illarion wagged a finger at him, chuckling his amusement. They said nothing more, though, as they headed down the tunnel. They knew to keep quiet, though. Surely the behemoth and the horde must know what happened to Voseth, and that they were coming. The tunnel was empty of the horde, though there was still evidence of their crossing. And a humming sound was rising up from the tunnel. The tunnel sloped downwards, and there appeared to be a flickering light at the far end. The humming had solidified into chanting. This does not sound good, Illarion whispered. Valerius, who was limping and bleeding, just gave a nod. They crouched low and crept to the end of the tunnel, staying back from the light. They didn't have to worry, though. The tunnel opened up into a huge cavern where stalactites hung from the ceiling high overhead, and there was a raw stone altar at the far wall. Between them and this far wall was a sea of people. Hundreds of them, all chanting. The horde. And on the altar was a single lithe figure. Caden. I hope you're enjoying Dragon's Reign so far. Dragon's Reign is free for you to enjoy, but not free for us to make. There is a whole team working with me for audio editing, artwork, graphic design, and custom music. Most YouTube channels and podcasts have sponsors and take ads, but because of the kind of content we make, we can't run ads or get sponsors. Instead, we have other ways you can support me and the team behind this gay romance audiobook. One easy way is to buy or borrow my books from Amazon. They are all gay romance set in alternative worlds with vampires or shifters and other magical beings. You may not know that even if you borrow books with your Kindle Unlimited subscription at Amazon, they are free for you, but they still earn us money. The books are published under the name Ex Aritare, which actually means Raythe in Romanian. And if you love audiobooks, you can get professionally narrated versions of every one of my books on audible.com. The link to my author page is in the description below, as well as to the first book of the series I think you'll really like. Thank you so much for your support. People like you enable me and the team to keep writing these stories of gay romance, magic, monsters, and true love, and producing this very fun podcast for everyone. Thank you.